episode of DRL is brought to you by Hella Cocktail Company. At this point in the quarantine, you've probably become a teacher, a chef, a housekeeper, a hairdresser, a barista, a trainer, and so much more. But when it's time to unwind from all that, Hella Cocktail Company can turn you into a bartender, a great one. Hella Cocktail Company features premium bitters and soda, and cocktail mixes. My favorite is the spicy margarita mix. I use it to make chili watermelon margaritas, and I just add tequila, some watermelon juice, and then a few dashes of the smoked chili bitters. It's so good. Hella Bitters and Soda is now available at Whole Foods, or you can use code DRL online at hellacocktail.co for free shipping. Hello, my lovely listeners. Welcome back to another episode of DRL, where we're talking everything dating, relationships, and love. I'm your host, Tanisha Wood.
So today I have Cindy Wilson with me, and I saw Cindy's story just randomly on my timeline on Facebook. But the headline was something like, "I'm Asian, but I'm also Black." And I was like, let me read into this. What does this mean? And I read on, and it basically says that, Cindy is Korean, but she was adopted by Black parents. And so you're racially Korean, but you grew up culturally Black. And so you wrote a book about it called Too Much Soul, about your upbringing and what those experiences were like being raised by a Black family and being Asian. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Tanisha.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. So you have a very interesting childhood, or just life experience in general.
Yeah. Well, I mean, growing up for me, it felt normal to me for the most part. I mean, I knew there was some differences or nuance with my situation, but not to the point where I was just like, oh, this is like so different. Till I kind of ventured out into the real world. It was interesting, like hearing you introduce like just how you came across my article, because the article went viral. And so it's like that clickbait, So everybody was like, I'm Korean, but I'm culturally Black. So everybody had an opinion about it. I'm glad that you actually read the article because there's so many people that just had an opinion based on the topic or the title and not even reading it. It's been interesting since the article has come out.
Well, what was funny was when I did read the headline, I was like, is this like a Rachel Dolezal type of situation where she identifies as Black, but read it, and I was like, okay, I get it now. So You said that you didn't really realize that it was that different until you were really out in the world. But at home, like, what was life like?
For me, in my mind as a child, it was not a big deal for me. I talk about in my book just how I didn't really realize I was different, and not only like different as far as how I looked from my family, but just different how I looked, period, from the rest of society until I moved back to Jackson, Mississippi. Just to kind of give you some backstory, I was born in Seoul, Korea. And I was in the foster or adoption agency. And my parents were in the Army at the time. And so they're both African-American from Jackson, Mississippi. And so while they were stationed there, my mom she had a lot of miscarriages, but she wanted to have a child. So after doing research and reading more about it, at the time, like in Korea, it was pretty easy to adopt a Korean child and bring them back to the States. So my mom really looked into that process, ending up adopting me. I was only a couple months old. We stayed there for about a year. And then we came back to the States and moved to Chicago. 3 years later, they ended up having my brother. Then we moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. My parents got a divorce. And once they got a divorce, me, my mom, and my brother ended up moving back to Jackson, Mississippi. It wasn't until I moved back to Jackson where I realized, okay, I'm different because of just the way people would treat me. But then it was like, for me, I equated being different as not being good. because it was like the kids would pick on me, they would bully me, be very derogatory from like an Asian perspective, like Asian slurs, pulling their eyelids back, all that good stuff. Well, not really good.
All that mean stuff.
Yeah, so it's like I would probably say I was like 7 when we moved back, so I never experienced that before. And like I said, equating being different to not being good, it really developed a lot of identity issues for me. Just trying to figure out like where my place was, where I was most comfortable. I always tell people it was like equal opportunity racism in a sense. Like everybody picked on me, you know, like I don't know if you've ever been to Jackson, but it's a lot of Black people or it's a lot of white people.
I've only been to, where is it? I've been to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and that's my only experience in Mississippi.
In Jackson in particular, you don't see a lot of Asian people. I only remember 2 other Asian people growing up like that I went to school with, and they were both Chinese. And so it was interesting too because everybody called me Chinese.
Oh, of course.
And I'm Korean. So I was like, I'm not Chinese, which is not a bad thing. But then I'm just like, oh my gosh, people, there is more than one ethnicity of like being Asian. Also living in Jackson, it really limited my exposure as far as like Korean culture. When I was younger, my mom had bought me a tape on how to speak Korean. I was like, you barely speak Korean. Who am I going to speak to? And it's like probably one of the hardest languages to learn.
Right.
So I was just like, yeah, I don't know, like that tape collected dust somewhere. So like for a long time, people would ask me, do you want to go back to Korea and learn more about your heritage? And I was like, no, not really, because that's not how I grew up. And I'm good with like my experience.
So you felt like no attachment to like Korean culture at all?
Yes, I felt zero attachment until I moved to Atlanta 10 years ago. Some people, they might criticize that, but it's like for me, that just wasn't my experience and I was never exposed to it. So like, why would I want to go to a country where I've had zero exposure to it?
I guess it would be like saying to anybody, like saying to me, like, are you interested in Australian culture and is it something you want to learn deeply about? It's like, maybe I guess I could at some point, but I don't feel like I have any sort of connection to have that constant desire to want to learn about Australian culture.
Right. There are certain places in Atlanta that are heavily populated with Korean people. I was exposed to more of like the food, the culture. They have like a Korean festival. You know, and that just kind of leans into like representation and how much it really matters, you know, for people to be able to see like what their culture actually is, what their heritage actually is. So for me, that's a newer journey. Since I've come out with my book, I probably now have been to Korea twice. And I'll say like the first time that I went, I was super nervous. And I remember just, you know, like overthinking it, overanalyzing it. Like, well, what if I go? And what if they don't really, you know, like I don't speak the language and they're just like, oh, like, girl, bye. Like, we don't want to have anything to do with you. So I put a lot of pressure on myself initially. And then I just kind of had to get to a point of like, just go experience it for what it is, be open, try to enjoy it. I did not initially feel like it was a part of me. Like I felt completely like a tourist. When I would meet other people there, they would say, oh yeah, they can look at you and tell you're not Korean.
How could they tell?
Well, so they were like the way you dress and they were like in the way you do your makeup. Like they can tell you, and then you don't speak the language. So they know you're not Korean. And I was like, okay, I don't really know how to take that. But I felt like I was also bringing like an American culture with me that's different from like Korean culture. So I'm like very outgoing. I'll talk to anybody. So I'll walk up to people and be like, oh my gosh, I love your shoes. And they weren't rude, but they would just kind of look at me like,
I don't know you.
like, why are you talking to me? Like, why are you in my space? And so, you know, it was an interesting experience the first time, like I immediately found like a hip hop spot that I love there. And I learned and I was exposed to so much. So then I ended up going back again last year for an international Korean adoptee conference. Going back a second time, it did in a weird way for me, kind of felt more like home, like, because I was more familiar with it. So it was like I was going with other people that were Korean adoptees that I never met other Korean adoptees until shortly after I came out with my book.
So these, I assume, these Korean adoptees that you met were adopted by white people for the most part, I would assume.
Yes. Okay. I've met, or, over social media, like one other person that is fully Korean, that was adopted by a Black family. And her name is Letitia, which I love that.
In that space, did you feel connected to those adoptees, or is it still different because, yes, we're all Korean, yes, we're all adoptees, but culturally, I see things very different. Like, did it feel like different still, or was there like a community aspect to it?
A little bit of both. So, I would probably say, people are like your people, or, mostly people connect with other people based on their race. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if I'm Black and I see another group of Black people, I'm like, all right, I probably will have a, connection with them, maybe, possibly. But then being a Korean adoptee, there is like maybe a spoken and unspoken kind of connection that we all kind of relate to, of knowing that we've grown up in these transracial adoption experiences of like knowing nothing about our culture and heritage. And some people, like, their parents really fostered that and encouraged it and exposed them to that. And then there are other people that either, like in my situation, there was no way to expose them to that, or their parents too, that I feel like it's kind of selfish, but like, and probably in their minds it's not, but they're like, well, you're my child. So it's like, like you're going to have the same experience that I have, and but it's like, they don't take into account, and they totally overlook the fact that the world looks at them totally different too. So even though you may accept them as a person or who they are, when they go out into the real world, it's like they still have to deal with like certain issues, or are being treated a certain way because of how they look.
And in some ways, they're probably unprepared for that if they weren't getting that sort of preparation at home. They go out into the world like, why don't you accept me like my family does?
And I would say in my situation too, it's like you grow up in these communities where people know your situation, they know it's different, and they accept it. But then when you kind of go outside of that situation, so for example, like most people reading the article that you read, like they don't understand it. They're like, what? Like that is just, but then it's like my friends or people that read it that I grew up with, like, they're like, yeah, it's just how she grew up. Like it's normal. Like she grew up in the Black community. And, my thing was like, I'm not trying to say I'm Black, but it's like, I would be remiss too if I didn't recognize and respect the Black community for having a big place as far as like how I was raised. So I do feel a connection with them that is unlike any other connection that I feel with other groups of people. But then I still feel like it's different too, like because my experience is totally different.
Right.
Than most of their experiences. But then, I mean, I think that's just kind of the human experience too. Like no one's experience is monolithic. We may have some similarities, but like our experiences and how we were raised and what influences us, might be different.
Your story really made me think about the fact that there's a huge difference between race and culture, and it's often really overlooked. So I'm Black, but I could be African. I could be East African, which is even then different than West African. I could be Caribbean. I could be so many different things, but people in America particularly think that, well, you're Black, so I know most of what your experiences are going to be like then. And it's like, actually not. Like, I'm Jamaican, and that does have a different set of traditions, a different set of food, like none is better than the other, but it is certainly different. And you can't make assumptions just because you look at a person like, oh, she's Asian, so she must have, grown up in an Asian country, or her parents did. And, and then because of that, they start to treat you in that way.
People see me and, their initial go-to as far as relatability is like, especially before I went over there and learned more about it, it was like, oh, like I know martial arts, or can you speak the language, or I know these foods, or da, da, da. And I'm like, and so for me, that was one of the reasons why I decided to write my book, is because I do think that we look at people, you try to relate to them based on their outer appearance instead of really trying to get to know them. Every way you think you could possibly relate to me will probably not be how you relate to me.
Right.
Like I'd be like, I don't know. No, I don't know. I'm not understanding the words that are coming out your mouth or what you're talking about.
So in thinking about interviewing you today, one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, do you feel in any way not connected to either culture in some ways? And then I was like, well, that's kind of just like boxing her in. Why are you trying to box her in? But like, I couldn't help myself from going there though. You know what I'm saying? Like, my immediate response was to be like, well, where do you see yourself fitting most? But then I'm like, well, why are you doing that? Because I just need to know. It's just this sort of how we interact with each other is placing each other in a certain category and in a certain box, so that way we know how to interact.
Exactly.
But it's not right, but I can't help it.
I appreciate the fact that you're honest about it, because I'm like that too. That was another reason why I wrote the book, because I feel like we all do it. Like we have such a limited way of like the racial construct and like how it's supposed to be, or how, we should look at or approach people or relate to people. And, I think as like just in America, and as we become more of a melting pot, and then people are brought into this world in different situations, that like one size doesn't fit all, Exactly. So it's like really, exploring and getting to know people for who they are and what their experiences are, instead of just making that assumption that like, okay, she looks like this, so, this is how I'm going to be able to relate to her.
So you also went to an HBCU for college.
I did. Jackson State University.
How was that experience?
I would say for the most part, it was great. My grandma went to school there. My mom went to school there. So it's like I have family history ties there. My grandma used to work there. And then I made the cheerleading squad. I got a partial academic scholarship. So for me, it was like a no-brainer. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to go. So for the most part, I loved it. And then I thought it was cool too, because people were coming from all over the world. And so I was getting to meet people that had more exposure than even I had. So like getting to meet people that were more open and that did really take the time to get to know me, instead of just being like, and I did have people that were like, who's that Asian chick? Like, who's the Asian cheerleader? And then there was another Asian cheerleader right before me that was there. So people would be like, you've been here for a while. I'm like, oh,
it wasn't me. It was the other Asian girl.
All Asian people don't look alike, people. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I had to deal with that. So it was interesting. I would say for the most part, people were very nice, supportive. And I loved my experience, but there were some people that did try me, and would just say like really derogatory or just cruel comments towards me. And so, it was just kind of like one of those things where not on a daily, but in those moments I would have to decide, like, am I going to respond? Am I not going to respond? So those moments I didn't necessarily like, but And then it's interesting too, because like now that we're older, and maybe I just don't care or whatever, but I always remember the people that treated me well. And I always remember the people that didn't. And the people that didn't, it's so amazing to me how they forget, and
Did you forget you were really mean? Because now you're reaching out like we're friends.
Right. I'm like, no, I'm good on you. Like I could be cordial with you. And, we were younger, maybe you didn't know any better, but like, I don't forget it.
You were like, the date was February 4th, 1989 on the playground. I remember. Bye.
Exactly. Boy, bye.
So do you primarily date Black men, Asian men? Like what type of men do you date?
Yeah, so I've only
by the way, not that those are the only two men that you can date. Is it Black or Asian? Which is it? Okay, what type of men overall do you date typically?
I've only dated Black men, but I will say, like moving to Atlanta and like writing my book and just really kind of exploring like being more open just as a person and like encouraging other people to be more open, and then being exposed to more like Asian people, I'm like, oh, okay, like he's kind of, nice looking, he's got it together, I definitely am more open to it. I feel like I've been super focused these last couple of years, so like I might dive into dating here or there, and then I'm just like, nah, I'm gonna go back over here and focus on this. Like, you're just kind of a distraction for me.
Do Asian men approach you a lot?
No.
Really? Like never?
No, not really. It was interesting too, because me and one of my friends were out and there was like a group of white guys. And I was like, white guys never approach me.
Really?
And they were like, oh, we love Asian women. But then they were like, but we're just not as confident. Like Black men, they could just like get up and go talk to women. Like we can't do stuff like that. Like, you have to like kind of initiate with us or say something to us. And I
don't want to do all that. Come to me.
Right. Yeah. And so for me, like I'm very type A. Like I love a man that's very confident. Like if I have to initiate it, then like the sparks are going to dwindle very quickly. But yeah, like if you're confident, no matter what race, then I feel like that's a very attractive quality.
And do the men that you date, and not just the men, but in friendships and in other relationships that you have outside of your family, do you get treated like a Black person, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Like there's certain things that if I'm in a group of my Black friends, I would say something that I might not say if there's somebody white that's in the room or of another race, right?
Yeah.
And so do you feel like you're treated in that way and in that space? Or is it like, okay, don't say that because, Cindy's here?
No, they don't do that for sure. This is one thing that I have learned. It's interesting. And I would say not just for Black people, because white people have done it to me too. But people have this need to validate. And I think it helps them feel more comfortable to be themselves around you or whatever, so I've had Black people, white people, oh, she's one of us, like she's cool. So then it's like, okay, now we can say or do whatever, and be comfortable with it. So that's always been interesting to me because it's like I don't feel like people should have to like, oh, like she's Black, and I'm like, no, it's okay. I'm not Black. Like I'm Asian, but it's like, but I love Black people, and it's like, and I support Black people and it's cool, so it's been interesting. And I think that's a piece or a part of just that whole racial construct of like feeling like you have to validate certain individuals to accept them in order to be comfortable around them or to have them in your group or your space, which I think that kind of like it may validate them for you, but then it kind of invalidates who they are, So it's like, I don't feel like, and I know they're not doing it intentionally to make me feel like that. But it's like, in order to validate me to be a part of your group, like that does kind of happen. where then it, invalidates me as far as like who I am.
Do you typically tell people up front that, oh, by the way, yes, I'm Korean, but I have Black parents, or is that something you just sort of let them figure out on their own?
Yeah, I'd be like, my mama Black. It's interesting because, like sometimes I forget my experience, or I just don't think about it. And then when I'm around certain groups of people, I notice like I'll just start talking about things that I like or whatever, shooting the shit or whatever. And it's always interesting when I get that look, and where it's like they're confused as hell. They're like, where the hell did this lady come from? Like, I don't understand what is going on right now. And it just depends. I don't know. I guess it depends on my mood. If like I'm like, I don't mind having the conversation. But I think I kind of, I don't know. I think I kind of like it too when people are like I want them to ask me, or like engage in the conversation. Like, I'm just kind of curious, or I want to know. And like when people do that, then I do have the conversation like, oh yeah, I was adopted by a Black family. Or, and then it's interesting after I tell people, then they go,
it all makes sense now. Now, I've heard many stories from adoptees of at some point in life, they get curious and they're like, well, where am I from? Where are my birth parents? Is that a journey that you ever had? And did you ever try to find them or reach out or investigate?
It has been a journey for me because now I'm at a place where I am more interested. I am more open to that. And obviously, like I've been, I have initiated in different ways that process of finding out my birth parent. And I think for me, it's more of like being able to see people that share your same DNA, that potentially look like you, and seeing if you have the same mannerisms. But then too, it's like, I feel like once I do that, then what? Like there's the language barrier. Like, are we now all of a sudden supposed to have this relationship? And, I don't operate like that. Like it takes time for me to build relationships like that. Like, I'm not just going to be like, oh, you're my mom.
Hey,
or you're my dad. Yeah.
Let's do Christmas.
Yeah. I'm be like, I don't know you like that. Like we look alike. Cool. You might be cool, but and then for me, like, and I just want to preface it by saying like, my outlook on it is different than some other Korean adoptees' outlooks. But for me, my family is my family, period, point blank, but then I don't want to wait till I'm like 80 years old. And then I'm like, oh, I wonder what my parents are like, my birth parents. And then they're like, girl, they are gone. I probably am more interested in it, but then it's like, just speaking to other Korean adoptees that have gone through that process, like for some of them it's traumatic, like finding out that their parents are no longer alive for whatever reason, or, finding out that they do have parents, but they don't want to be reunited with them because they have a whole other family that they don't even know about them. And then like I've heard about people's experiences being reunited, and it's like just the emotion of like figuring it out, and having to go through that. Like I feel a connection, but then it's weird. And then, and then it's like, especially if they're still in Korea and they have a certain culture, and then, being a Korean adoptee in America, like it's a lot. One person that I interviewed for my podcast, she was saying how like, every time she talks to her birth mother, like she gets so upset and cries all the time. It affects so many people. And so I'm open to it, but I'm just not like, yeah, I really want to dig in there and like, figure all of that out. But I mean, maybe
You're like,
one
if
day.
the stars all align, then maybe. But
yeah.
Do you feel like your parents prepared you, or was it something you guys talked about frequently in your household? Like how different the world might be for you based on them adopting you versus an Asian couple or maybe even a white couple?
No, because I feel like my mom was just like, you're a part of our family, which I think is great. And I think a lot of adoptive parents do this, but I think it's to the child's detriment to just be like fully assimilate them into your experience and not taking into account theirs. You want them to feel a part of like your family and the community, which is great. But then it's like kind of like that validation thing. But it's like then I have to kind of forego a piece of who I am, you know, in order to assimilate, you know, now just being older and having experienced it and hearing other people's experiences. Like, I think when it comes to adoption, and then especially like a transracial adoption, you know, that is the time where if you're going to get into something like that, you have to be the most selfless person or individual and not let your ego get involved where you're like, well, no, but we're your family. And, you know, because I hear about other adoptive parents, like once people go through a reunion or they even talk about being interested about their adoption, that a lot of parents get offended. And it's like, but that's a part of.
Who wouldn't be curious about where they came from and who they came from?
Some parents get offended, like, I took care of you, you know, we love you. And so it's like they put this guilt on them for wanting to know more about their roots and their heritage and their DNA and, you know, their parents. And then, you know, so sometimes it hinders people from like, they don't go through with that process because it's so emotional for their like adoptive parents.
A little selfish.
You know, I think my mom, like if I were to go through that process, she would support me in it. But then, you know, just being a human and having an ego, like I get it too, where you would be like, but that's my baby, you know, and so I get it. But then like too, like you got to let that go and like, you know, find a way to really be fully supportive of that as well.
How were you treated by your extended family? So I'm imagining this Black couple in the military. They're coming back from Korea and they're like, oh, hey, everybody, by the way, we adopted this Korean little girl. Here she is, meet her. How did the extended family and maybe friends and people around react to you throughout your life?
It was great. Like I write about my grandfather in my book because like they're just people that you meet in life and you just automatically have this connection. And it doesn't matter like what you look like or your circumstance or your situation. Like, so for my grandfather, and this is a way to my heart too, like he was the cook. Like my grandmother didn't cook, he cooked, and I love to eat. So, and I've always been like that. And so it was like for us, we bonded over like his cooking and like my love for like his cooking and like places we would go to. So he was like by far one of my favorite human beings, you know. And then I would say, you know, for everybody else, like I had cousins, we fought like cousins and they never said anything that made me feel any different or not apart.
Now, being in a lot of Black spaces and dating Black men, does it ever come up where, you know, Black women will sometimes be like, oh, there goes such and such, you know, he only dates white girls. There's such and such, you know, he only dates Asian girls. There's definitely a response sometimes from Black women when they see a Black man dating a non-Black woman. And I don't know if you've ever been around when those conversations are happening, but if you are, how do you respond to something like that?
It was interesting growing up and like my brother, he's Black. So like, I remember one time we went to the mall and it was this older Black lady and she saw us and she was like, and like, she just like stared and was like mean mugging me. And like, you know, I've learned to restrain myself now, more so now. I mean, I still, you know, I could have a moment, I don't know. But like I remember I was ready to fight because I was like, you don't know me. Like, this is my brother, you know? So my brother had to like, okay, come on, let's just go. Like being younger and just, you know, having my brother around and women automatically thinking that and like just that lady's response, I'm like, that really bothered me. But I would say, I think too, like when you're more defensive, it's like people can sense it and you tend to get more of those reactions. You know, everybody's has a right to their own opinion about the situation, but it's like, just don't disrespect me. So I'll say as I've gotten older, I haven't had anybody blatantly disrespect me, but like most of my core friend group of women are Black. You know, I hear the conversations and I respect it. Like, I don't particularly have a respect for men that are like, oh, I don't date this group of women because XYZ. And then, especially to be a Black man that would say they wouldn't date Black women, you know, like, to be a person that wouldn't date other people of their own race, like that, I don't prescribe to that and I don't support that. And, you know, I do have my own opinions about that. But I mean, I think to each their own and to each their preference. You would look at me and, you know, people would be like, yeah, she should date Asian men or whatever. But I typically don't have a lot that I relate to when it comes to Asian men and their culture and how they grew up. And so for me, like my comfort level, you know, is mostly with Black men, but I am open too. That just also comes from me growing up in a predominantly like white, Black type of environment and feeling more comfortable dating Black men because I've had those experiences growing up where I'm friends with white people and like somebody in their family or like they may slip and say something about Black people. And I'm just like,
why do you have to do it?
You know, my family is Black. I try not to put everybody in that box, but that is a hesitancy for me and like a somewhat of a fear, you know, like maybe they are cool and then all of a sudden something slips and they say something or somebody in their family says something. And then I'm like, oh my gosh.
You had to do it. Have you ever been on a date with an Asian man?
I have not.
I feel like you need to do that in 20 just to see. Just to see.
No,
in 2020 just to see.
I do. I agree too. Yeah. And when I came to New York for my birthday last year, there was like a couple of Asian guys that I saw there that I was like, whoa.
Hey you.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm definitely more open to it.
So what is your current dating situation?
I'm not. But it's interesting. Well, so I was dating somebody and just, I guess, you know, like as you get older and then just the evolution of like how you look at dating. And I was going to say too, like even writing my book and just for me to encourage other people to be more open, but then also thinking about how I look at things. It also made me, you know, like I talk a lot about race, culture, identity, but it also made me question like how I look at sexuality. People always look at my situation and they think it's like this whole debate, you know, which I'm like, that's just my life. Like, that's how I grew up. Like, I don't understand why people are debating about it. So it's like, I do recognize like the way we look at things from a racial perspective are so limited, but I think the way we look at sexuality can sometimes be limited. So, you know, and I know this is probably not PC, but I'm just being honest. I didn't understand bisexuality for a long time. I was just like, no, like you pick one of yeah, like don't be greedy, like just pick one. And then even now, you know, men having conversations or the conversation about like, and the double standard, like if a woman kisses or has sex with another woman, but then she marries a man, like that doesn't make her gay. But if a man does it, then he's automatically like,
right.
You're if you did it in the past, you're married now, it doesn't matter, you're gay. And so it does make me question like the way we and I don't understand it, but it does make me question and want to understand it more. Not necessarily from like a preference standpoint, but just because it's like, I do think there are people probably living more of that type of lifestyle, but out of fear, you know, of like being judged, that they're scared to just kind of come out and say, yeah, I have had this experience and no, that didn't make me gay or whatever. You know, it was just like, I tried it or, you know, like, so yeah, I mean, so I said all that to say, like, just writing my book, it did make me more open to like other things that, you know, like constructs, like when it comes to race, sexuality, and other things, where we often limit people and their experiences, which I thought, you know, was interesting, like with your podcast, and especially listening to the open relationship one with Linda.
Yeah.
And it's like, I really loved how she was just like, she researched it and, it was like just her maturity level. So like listening to that and having gone through like a situation where I was dating somebody, like for me, I think where I'm at now, it's like a situation just has to work for me. And from a perspective of like, I feel like I'm always growing. So I think it's important for me to be with somebody I can grow with, like we can grow together. Because if I was with somebody that was stagnant, I know that wouldn't work for me. In the mindset of like thinking more openly, it makes me look at like marriage kind of differently. Like I love my space, like I love my time. And like sometimes I do kind of feel like I'm married and I'm in love with like my passion and my purpose to like help people not feel alone. A lot of people not only want to be accepted, but they want to feel safe to be who they are, which is kind of sad to even have to say that. I just think about like breaking away from tradition and how people look at relationships and how they should be, but what really works for me. So I'm like, hopefully one day I'm going to be rich like Oprah. Like, and I'm kind of like, why do I need to get married? Like,
I'm going to get a Stedman.
Right. I'm going to give me a Stedman. Unless it makes sense from a legal perspective, like if we had kids, then absolutely, because I would want us to all share the same name. And then just from an insurance perspective and like wills and all that.
I need to be the beneficiary.
Right. But then it's like, for me, like it has to make sense. So I don't necessarily, prescribe to like, I have to be married, in order to, and who knows, like maybe I'll get in a relationship with the man of my dreams. And then I'm like, no, we totally should.
Let's get married tomorrow. I'm planning to.
I changed my mind. Never mind.
I agree with you. I think what's good about like right now, 2020 is we're getting to this place where there's more than like 4 boxes to check. And before the boxes were like, okay, you can get married, and then you can have kids, you can have your job, and then just hopefully this person doesn't drive you crazy for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But I think we're getting to a place now where we're like not going to question, particularly women anymore. Like, well, why aren't you married? Why don't you have kids? And I think we could just be now.
Yeah.
Not totally. I think we're still getting there. We're still getting there, but I'm glad to hear more people having the conversation of like, is that actually for me? And people questioning, like, is it for me? Because for a really long time, I think when I was in my 20s, it just felt like everybody had this plan.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Minnesota, but it seemed like everybody had this plan of like going to college and then getting married shortly after that. And that was like never my plan. I was like, I'm not that I never wanted to be married, but I just wasn't thinking about it at that point. Yeah. And now that I'm older, like I'm 36 and I'm like, I actually could go with or without. I think before I met my boyfriend, I was very much like, and I want to meet somebody and marry them. But like, that wasn't what I wanted. That was the verbiage I was using. But what I actually wanted was like true friendship and true companionship and somebody that's actually there for me and understands me. And whether we get married or not, or how we decide to define our relationship, like that other stuff doesn't matter and can be figured out. But it's like, everybody wants that. Like everybody wants that love and that companionship, but we feel like to fit right in society, in order to gain that, we have to put ourselves into one of these boxes. And it's just not true. Cause like, screw it. Like, as long as you're happy, like who cares? Like who cares what anybody else thinks about how you choose to structure your relationship?
I've seen so many people prescribe to like, you got to be with somebody, you got to have a boyfriend, or you have to get married, or you have to have children. And I see people go through different facets of that and they're miserable, just to be in what is like.
To check the box.
Yeah, just to check the box of like, I'm in a relationship, or yes, now I'm married, or yes, now I have children. Like, listening to your episode on fertility, the women were like, look, I value my nap time and like my sleep, and I'm like that too. And so now it's like, I have a niece that I get to spoil endlessly when I want to, but then I get to come home and focus on like the things that I want to focus on. I think I'm just in a space now of like figuring out what works for me. And I know like even in my book, like I talk about relationships, and I've just never been one of those fairy tale type chicks. Like I don't like being in relationships or situations because then just to be in one, because it gives me anxiety trying to figure out how the hell I get out of this, you know? And so
I've always now that I'm in this, how do I get out?
I know, like, oh shit. Like, oh my gosh. And those are the worst, you know, because I'm like, I hurt your feelings, but like, oh God. And so I've always felt in my heart, like once I meet that person, like I'll just know. And I mean, that could be, you know, whatever way out there kind of thinking. I think, you know, just with my life and how it's evolved, and like whenever certain opportunities or things came into my life, like I knew that those were the right opportunities, or these were the things that were supposed to happen in order to get me to here, to the next place in my journey. I feel very tied to like my purpose and my passion. And I feel like, you know, when the timing is right, it will happen, you know, that I will meet that person. But right now that just isn't my focus. And I'm okay with that. You know, I don't understand what other people, you know.
That's all that matters.
Right. Even with some of the criticisms that I get just about my life, which is crazy to me, getting the stories of people that have very different lifestyles or situations than I do, but just how, you know, hearing my story and reading my book, like help them be okay with their situation, really validates, you know, my why. And so I do think it's important for people to share their stories, you know, because it's like, you never know how it can help somebody else. And so that's why I love, you know, what you're doing on your podcast, because, you know, those different situations help for people to think differently about their situations or how they're thinking about their situations. And so, you know, that's why I decided to start my podcast, Too Much Soul, because I felt like in my book, I shared my story, but I know so many dope people, you know, after this, I'm going to have you on my podcast.
Yay!
You know? So it's like, you know, I feel like people have great perspectives and their own stories to share. You know, I just encourage people to continue to share their stories because, like I said before, you just never know who it will impact and help along the way.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Where can people reach you and find the podcast and find the book?
Yeah, so my book is on Amazon, paperback, Kindle. I also have a website, toomuchsoul.com. I'm on Instagram, Asian_Southern_Belle. And my book also has an IG page, toomuchsoul_book. And you guys get the book. Let me know what you think about it. And just reach out to me. Hit me up on social media.
By the way, I love the cover of the book, how it's like too much soul, like Korea soul, and then it's crossed out and it's like SOUL. I think that's really dope.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you for sharing your wisdom today. And I feel like this will open up more doors and opened up more minds, because I like it when people are sort of like a mix of different thoughts, races, philosophies, and like you're not easily figure outable, which is like awesome. So it lets people know you shouldn't assume.
Exactly. You can't judge a book by its cover, people.
Don't. And thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Please reach out to me at Tanisha Wood on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and let me know what you think of today's show. And until next time, wish me love.
Hello again, my lovely listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of DRL. If you like the show, be sure to go on iTunes and leave a rating and also write a review. And don't forget to share with your friends and tell them all about DRL. Thank you so much for supporting.